Okay guys, as you can see behind me, the shop is empty, the RAM is off of the lift, and this is going to be the conclusion to the G56 transmission issue. Again, as you can see, it's off of the lift and it's completed. So I have put the G56 transmission issue with the shop updates in the past, or the other two segments were included with shop updates. This one is going to be its own segment video, and I'm going to post it separately. So it's not going to be included in the shop update. It's only going to be about getting that G56 transmission back in the RAM and getting it back in the road again. Okay, so one of the things that I talked about in my last shop updates and the discussion with the problem with the transmission, the G56 and the 2018 Ram, is that I'm putting in a temperature gauge, a transmission temperature gauge, and I've got it into the pillar pod. It's down here. I haven't got it wired in yet. What I had to do is take out the old gauge that was in this slot, which was a coolant temperature gauge, but that coolant temperature gauge was a mechanical gauge. In other words, it had a hardwired probe on it that went directly, had to go directly into a coolant port. I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was an electric gauge, not a mechanical gauge. And when I got it, I stuck it in there, pushed it all the way through the firewall, only to figure out that it wasn't long enough to reach a port in the engine block. So I pulled that out. I never got a replacement for it. I pulled it out and replaced it with a new transmission temperature gauge. I've got to get it wired in, but that's just another thing in the saga of the G56 transmission. So I'm over here by the forklift truck where the transmission, I brought the transmission in, as seen at the end of the last shop update video. What I received right after I received the transmission is the oil that I'm going to be using into the manual transmission when I put it in. And rest assured, automatic transmission fluid, which Chrysler puts in their manual transmissions, is not going back in this transmission. What I've got is AMSOIL, manual transmission, and transaxle gear lube. Now, again, as I had discussed in other videos, Mercedes-Benz makes this transmission. Chrysler uses it. Mercedes-Benz, in their transmissions that they use in Europe, and their recommendation for this transmission is to use gear oil, and a specific gear oil, a synthetic gear oil, and it is kind of costly, as was this kind of costly. But what we're talking about here is what Mercedes-Benz recommends for theirs, and what I'm paying is like $16 a quart for this oil. What Chrysler actually puts in it, automatic transmission fluid, they're probably paying less than $2 a quart for the oil. So I have no doubt in the world that this wasn't done for some economic reason. And I will discuss this gear oil versus automatic transmission fluid a little bit later. But yeah, I got the gear oil, or what I'm going to use, the manual transmission oil, for it last night. There's some things that I've still got to do. There's some components that I have to take off of the old transmission. Like the new transmission, the output shaft is just the output shaft. I have to get that adapter coupling that adapts the output shaft to the drive shaft, and get that off the old transmission and get it onto the new one. But anyways, bring you back. So one of the things that I'm doing here is doing a little preparatory work for the transmission going back in. I had to pull the transmission mount bracket off of the old transmission and put it on. Now what I'm doing is taking the flywheel, the outpush shaft to flywheel, or flywheel, the outpush shaft to drive shaft adapter and getting that on. I'm over here to the truck, and one of the things I kind of wanted to show you is the Isopro gauge. It uses like a pin connector in the back to put it in, and you needed this insertion tool. I didn't find this insertion tool right away, and I was trying, I couldn't figure out how to get them in there, and it kept saying to use the insertion tool. And I go back to where I had unboxed it, and there was this bag with this insertion tool. But what this thing is like the old telephone, hardwired telephone lines, where they had a tool to crimp them into like a pin connector. The wire gets squeezed in between a connector, and there's like a knife-like, let's call it a knife-like edges on the side of it that kind of cuts the insulation and exposes the bare wire to that connection. But I got it in, and I kind of brought you over here because I'm using those tools, tools to I use the pick tools, the plastic pick tools, to get the dash apart, and I'm going to be using them to set this into there. And here goes the gimbal again. Sorry guys. So I got the gauge installed, and I got it wired back in there. Now I did have an issue with it. I went to turn it on. I wired it up, put it all back together, went to turn it on, and the damn gauge didn't work. It didn't light up, and I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? The other gauges worked, and I kind of tied into those same wires, but the new Isopro gauge, what is going on with this gimbal? The new Isopro gauge didn't work, and I couldn't figure it out. But what I did is took it back apart, was checking the leads on the wire, and the leads seemed to be good. And then I noticed that I had two wires in opposite spots. It was supposed to be red, orange, black, and I had red, black, orange. So I switched them wires around, and I'm going to show it to you now. Now it's a different color. It's green instead of the white, but that's okay with me. As long as it works, and it works good. It's good. But I buttoned it all back up again. All I've got to do is get the gimbal to work. All I've got to do is run these leads down to the transmission sensor. But anyways, I'll bring you back. Okay, I'm just going to throw a clip in here with the transmission up on the transmission jack underneath the truck. This was the process of starting the installation. This process took a long time. Sometimes lining that shaft up into the pilot bearing can take forever. Okay, here we are, guys. Next day, still don't have the transmission in. Sometimes it's a bitch to get these manual transmissions back in again. You have to line them up perfectly. it's a little bit more of a bitch. So with certain models, again, these trucks, what happens is the frame comes through, they install the engine, transmission, and drivetrain on it, and then lower the cab onto it. There's a extremely tight clearance up here. This thing actually rubs against the floor pan of the truck. I was trying to get it in by myself. I couldn't get it in, and put a little grease up there on that thing so that it would slide up forward. There's like a hump that comes up, and it humps up. Once you get it past that raised portion, you're golden, but getting it up to that raised portion sometimes can be a bitch. But what the problem is, the jack broke. The wheel on the jack broke, and now I've got to go see if I can find something to replace this with. But anyways, I'll bring you back. Just a quick shot. I went out to Tractor, well, I went to Napa first because that's where I bought this thing. Guy's gonna check and see if they'll give me 4 new casters for it. But I needed them right away, so I went over to Tractor Supply, got 4 casters that, ironically, the whole pattern matches the ones that came off of there. They're rated for 300 pounds apiece, which equals the 1,200 pounds of the transmission lift. So that's
okay.
fixed.
So we got the transmission back in finally. After 4 hours today, we finally got the thing back in. We went to put these on. The one side went on fine. The other side, the fin casting is in the way of the bolt, and you can't get the socket on. What I'm going to have to do is take a grinder and grind that off a little bit. Ridiculous. It's a brand new part. I mean, it's a good quality part, just that the quality assurance isn't any good on it. Nobody checked it.
And there should have been more room.
A lot more room.
Okay, so this is just a shot of the mess that's left over from doing that. The transmission, that is. That's basically kind of what this video is going to be about. So where I left you off was we had that issue with that cooler that went on the side. The casting was different. One casting was different from the other one. And we realized because of the fins on the side of the cooler that you wouldn't be able to get a impact socket on it. So it's kind of like those lug nuts on aluminum rims where you can't get an impact socket on it. It has to be like a chrome type socket that's got thinner walls on it. Well, even with a chrome socket on the thing, we couldn't get it on. So what we ended up doing was taking a die grinder and grinding the fin down on the side of it that was interfering with the socket fit onto the bolt. Wasn't the bolt, it was definitely the casting. And what the other side, the driver's side that I had put the heat temperature probe into was fine. I didn't have an issue with that side at all. So whether they have multiple castings, dies for the casting, or what, and one of them is just off a little bit, you know, it wasn't a big deal. Again, it's aluminum die grinder. Took us not even a minute, maybe a minute and a half to just grind it off and then be able to get the socket onto it. So I took it out last night. Everything went fine. What I did is I took it down the thruway 70 miles an hour into a headwind, and it was running about 132 degrees. It took forever. I probably drove a good 10 miles before the temperature gauge even came off of 100. So it got up to like 132. what I'm going to do is, again, this video was, I was just showing you the chaos and the mess that was left in the shop here from us doing it. I'm going to be going through this morning, picking stuff up, but I'm going to sit down and I'm going to talk about what I think caused this problem to begin with. And then I'm going to show you, I'll bring the truck in and show it to you, how the cooling fins worked on the side of the PTO covers, the transmission in place, stuff like that. But anyways, I'll bring you back. Okay, so at the beginning of the video, I told you that I would have a discussion about what my thoughts were on the cause of this and my thoughts about not putting automatic transmission fluid into the transmission, my new transmission. Again, the G56 transmission is made by Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz uses it in medium-duty trucks in Europe. Their recommendation for the fluid in the transmission is gear oil, a synthetic gear oil. Now, the point of Chrysler putting automatic transmission fluid into the transmission is driven by their saying that the climate in the United States is a lot colder than the climate is in Europe, where the transmission is used, and that is the driving force behind them using automatic transmission fluid. I don't believe that, and let me give you some thoughts about that. I look at the weather. I live in Hamburg, New York. So ironically, there's a town in Germany called, city in Germany called Hamburg also. Everybody's probably familiar with that point. If I look at the weather in Hamburg, Germany compared to the weather in Hamburg, New York, and we all know that Hamburg, just outside of Buffalo, has pretty severe winters. If I look at the weather in those two, village and city, village being New York, city being Germany, the weather isn't that far from being different. The average mean temperature is pretty much the same, probably within 5 to 10 degrees. Germany being a little bit warmer. Of course, the snowfall in Hamburg, New York is a lot more than they get in Germany, but that's a moot point. It's the temperature that they were talking about. So if you average the temperature of the United States compared to the average temperature in Germany, I don't believe that. I believe that Chrysler did this for a financial or an economic point, just totally. It was totally driven by economics of deciding to put automatic transmission fluid in a manual transmission. And the fact of the matter is that the gear oil, synthetic gear oil that Mercedes recommends using, or that I bought for mine. Now, I didn't buy the same oil, but I bought the same kind of weight oil and synthetic using AMSoil. It's approximately $16 a quart. And if I take the most expensive automatic transmission fluid that I found in my brief search for it, the automatic transmission fluid is probably anywhere between $4 and $6 a quart cheaper. I think Chrysler's entire reason for it was cost. They saved money by using automatic transmission fluid. So let's get to the other point. Do I think automatic transmission fluid is the same protection as gear oil? let's go into that. I do not think automatic transmission fluid was designed to have the viscosity to be used as gear oil. I think automatic transmission fluid, like the term implies, was intended and designed for wet clutch type applications. We all know that automatic transmissions do not have the gearing in them. They do have gears, mainly planetary type gear systems in them, but the fluid is designed for the wet clutch application of an automatic transmission. It does not have the viscosity or the lubrication that gear oil provides because it was designed for a different purpose. Now, do I think that it would have worked in a manual transmission? It is very possible that it could have worked, but they didn't cool it. As we all know, all automatic transmission fluids, when they're put in automatic transmissions in vehicles in the United States, regardless of whether it's a truck or an automobile, is cooled. It has cooling fins out by the radiator that provides cooling for the fluid. They did not do that on the manual transmission, and we all know, or most of us know, that truck services manual transmissions fluid can get as hot, if in some cases hotter, than automatic transmission fluid. Now, we're not talking apple to apple here, because the temperature taken on automatic transmission fluid is a cooled temperature. But if you didn't cool that automatic transmission fluid, the transmission fluid probably would have gotten as hot as my fluid probably got with a non-cooled fluid. So, let's bring up another point. Brian Block brought up the point that I probably didn't change the automatic transmission fluid in my manual transmission as frequently as I should have, or as frequently as recommended, and he is absolutely correct. But my point is, automatic transmission fluid should have never been put in a manual transmission if it wasn't properly cooled. So I kind of didn't, my bad, but I didn't think about changing it as often as it should be, because it wasn't the proper fluid that needed to be put into a manual transmission. My thought was that it would have been designed right to begin with. Well, Mercedes-Benz designed it probably right to begin with, but Chrysler opted out of it, and again, my thoughts are it's an entirely financial motive behind it to use automatic transmission fluid instead of gear oil in the transmission. So this is my decision not to put it back in. I probably would take the manufacturer's recommendation over Chrysler's recommendation, because I think Chrysler's recommendation is financially motivated, not motivated by the needs or the requirements of the manufacturer of the transmission. So let's get on with it. Again, I used AMSOIL and I showed that to you in the beginning of this thing. But let's go on. I'll show you the transmission after it got installed in the truck. Okay, we're up here under the truck, and I just wanted to bring you in. What I did is I brought the truck in. I just wanted to check the oil level of it. Now, I did not, when I put this in, I only put 7 quarts in. Normally, the normal transmission holds 5 quarts, but with the added, that's where I checked the oil. The added cooling ports on the side, this and this, it adds another quart per side. So I put in 7 quarts, I pulled that plug out, and the oil level is exactly at the bottom of that plug. But anyways, so there it is, all back together. It's probably got about 75 miles on it since I did it. Damn that gimbal. Very quiet. Again, it's extremely quiet now. I think most of the noise was coming from that throw-out bearing. Of course, probably some of it was coming from the transmission, but anyways, back in, everything's good. I'll let you know. So I took it out, and as I said before in another clip, the temperature was running about 70 miles an hour headwind down the thruway. It was a nice day. I'm going to say it was probably around 65. I don't really know what the temperature was. I really didn't look at that, tell you the truth, but the transmission temperature, when I say the temperature was the outside temperature, transmission temperature was running about 132, 135, somewhere around in that approximate area, 70 miles an hour headwind down the thruway. Anyways, okay, we'll bring you back. So the transmission, the old transmission, has to be put back together, and I've got to send it back to Texas for a core charge. But one of the things that I just wanted to mention before we cut this video off, I don't have any reference point, as I discussed before, as far as that transmission temperature goes. There was no temperature gauge in it to begin with. Again, it was automatic transmission fluid, so I don't have any point of reference. All I know is that people are saying that you probably shouldn't go above 225 degrees, 230 degrees with synthetic gear oil, or it starts losing its viscosity, losing its ability to lubricate, burns out quickly. So what I'll do is I've got a couple of hauls coming up next week. One of them is a fairly heavy haul, so I'll keep you guys posted. I told you what the temperature was driving the truck with no trailer or anything, hauling nothing. I'll keep you guys posted as to where this temperature goes with the transmission and hauling, where the temperature goes with the transmission and just pulling the trailer, and what the relevance of the temperature is to ambient air temperature on the outside. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Leave a comment, hit that like button, subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.